Good evening, Xavier basketball fans. It's Jim Reeker, and this is the Raging X Report with my friend Bill Gabriel. It's December 3rd. And if you've missed us a little bit, for some reason we had a recording problem again last week. Hopefully you're listening to us, and we aren't going to have that this week, and hopefully we're kind of like the Musketeers. We're starting to get some things straightened out here and then on the road to success. But December 3rd, the Muskies stand 5-3, got 3 wins in a row, starting with the last game out in Maui and 2 home games last week. And with that, I'll welcome in my Xavier pal, Bill Gabriel. How we doing tonight, Bill?
I'm doing just fine, Jim. Glad to see the Muskies are stringing together some W's.
It is, and college football season kind of winding down, getting into the bowl season, so a little bit more focus on college basketball. Big week for the Muskies. Going to start out with the OU Bobcats this coming Wednesday, and then, of course, the Crosstown Shootout, which will be Saturday afternoon at, I think they call it Fifth Third Arena, the new Fifth Third Arena, whatever the UC Bearcats are calling it these days. But let's review the 2 games that we saw last week, starting with a nice win last Wednesday over the Miami Redhawks. Talk about that game a little bit, what you saw good, and anything that else you want to comment on the game against the Redhawks.
Well, I thought the Miami game was just a great, example of what the current Muskie roster can do when they're focused. They had really good defensive intensity for most of the 40 minutes of that game. They forced 14 turnovers and held Miami to 33% shooting for the game, which is outstanding. And they also held their leading scorers, Nike Sibande and Delonte Brown, to a combined 15 points on 6 for 22 shooting. So, yeah, that's some solid defensive work there from the Muskies. Offensive intensity and execution was really a good point for the Muskies as well. They only committed 3 turnovers for that whole game. They made a season-high 33 field goals, and their defense to offense transition on those 14 turnovers led to 28 points. So just a great, offense and defensive set of stats there. About the only thing you can really nitpick them about was they got out-rebounded 41-33, with 17 of those being offensive rebounds for the Miami Redhawks. But my guess is when you shoot 33%, you're going to miss a lot of shots and got a lot of opportunities for rebounds. So that plays into that as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on everything you said. The defensive effort was great. Nike Sibande, who only had 8 points, was averaging 17, or is averaging 17 right now, even with that included. And I believe Najee guarded him most of the game. And then Delonte Brown only had 7 points, and he was averaging almost 16 for the season. So agree with you that. And, yeah, the turnovers. Man, if you can 3 turnovers, I would settle, I said many, many times, for any single-digit turnovers. Keep it under 10. I think you give yourself a chance to win the game. But 3, that's in fact, I think I looked at the last time the Musketeers had that few turnovers in a game was back in 2010. So it had been 8 years since they'd had a performance on the turnover ratio like that. Yeah, and kind of balanced scoring. Najee had 17, Tyreek 13 with 13 rebounds, Scruggs with 12, Quentin with 8 points and 8 assists and no turnovers. If we get that every game from Quentin, again, what a game it would be, or what a season it will be. And one last thing I picked up on, another thing I always harp on, is free throws, and they shot 9 for 12, 75%. I like to see that free throw percentage somewhere right in that range between the 70 and 80%. Again, I think is what they need to do to win. So, yeah. And, Coach Steele said it might have been the best 40 minutes they put together all year long. Anything else about the Redhawks game that you want to talk about, or we can move on to the Oakland game, which was played Saturday afternoon at Saturday at noon at the Cintas Center?
Yeah, I think just Miami was just is a nice, solid, opening tip to final horn performance by the Muskies, and hopefully we can see a few more of those as the year progresses here.
All right, on to the Oakland game. What were your takeaways from that?
I don't think that was quite a full 40 minutes of solid effort from the Muskies. I know from the post-game press conference that Coach Steele was not happy with their intensity and focus at the start of the game. And I think that really set them up because they gave up a whole lot of open three-point looks, which led to Oakland shooting 11 for 28, 39.3% from the three-point line. And that's just not something that you have, especially if their post players also playing well. And Xavier Hill-Mays from Oakland, he put in 22 first-half points, 30 points for the game, and that was, I thought, man, this guy's really good. He might have been, as the guy behind us kept saying, he's the best Xavier on the floor right now. And, I just, we didn't put together really a good, especially that first half, a solid 40 minutes there. Another concern I'd say that comes out of that Oakland game is, as well as Quentin played against Miami, if he's going to struggle like he did with Oakland, it could be very devastating for the Muskies' chances this year. When he goes 1 for 10 from the floor, 0 for 3 from 3, has 3 assists, 2 turnovers. It's just that's some tough sledding there from our point guard spot. And then another solid performance by Najee and Tyreek. Kyle Caslen was an unexpected double-digit scorer. He hasn't really done that much for the Muskies, but he was 6 for 6 from the free throw line, which was huge. And that thrown in with the Miami game gets the Muskies up to 80% for this week, which is a pretty good free throw percentage. I know you'll like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree on all accounts. And the turnovers were still in single digits. They only had 9. I think they were, I remember for a while, I think they may have had 3 at halftime. I think Quentin came out real early in the second half and had 2 right away. Yeah, the 11 three-pointers, that's a concern, especially they had a freshman, Brandon Morris, who's shooting 80% from 3. Doesn't take a lot, but he can knock it down when he's left open. And I know Coach Steele was not happy because he was left wide open. I think he was 4 for 6 in the game against the Musketeers, and he wasn't happy that he got those shots, knowing that if he had the open 3, he was going to knock it down. He's only a freshman. Free throw percentage, 82%. I can live with that all day long. Balanced scoring, Quentin, and there's a question, is he maybe still suffering effects from the shoulder injury? I was reading a couple boards, people saying, it seems like one thing Quentin had been doing well last year was finishing near the basket. And he doesn't seem to be finishing, and people thought maybe he's shying away from drawing the contact or not making as much contact when he goes to the rim because of that shoulder. It is his non-shooting shoulder. Maybe that's affecting him. But that's something that's got to get straightened out soon. We don't really, I don't think, need Quentin to be a big scoring threat. We got enough offensive power with some other guys around him. We just need him to kind of be the quarterback, control things. But 5 guys go for double figures. It was very, very balanced. And Zach Hankins, 11.7 rebounds, and the amazing thing about that is he only played 12 minutes in the game. He's been a nice addition to the Musketeers roster this year, as have all the incoming players, especially the graduate transfers. Okay, anything more about the Oakland game, or we move to this week?
I'd say we got a big week here, so we better get into it.
Yeah, we start with the OU Bobcats. Remember that. We play them Wednesday. Hopefully the Musketeers remember we play them Wednesday because I was just reading this morning a little bit of the UC ink in the local paper, and they talked about they play the NKU Norse, a team near and dear to your heart, tomorrow night, and the media says they better not fall into a trap game looking ahead to the big crosstown shootout on Saturday. Well, kind of dawned on me, kind of the same case for the Musketeers. Looking at OU, they're 5-2. What do we know about them?
The Ohio University Bobcats, yeah, they're not a bad squad. They have wins over some teams that we've seen in the NCAA tournament before, with victories over Marshall, Iona, and Austin Peay. And their losses were to the South Florida Bulls and the Loyola Marymount. So some, if you follow college basketball, you kind of recognize those names. They're averaging about 79 points per game, and they are a team that is not necessarily, though, looking to do it from the three-point line. They have a couple guys who've put up some three-pointers, but it's not their go-to thing. They're looking to get to the rim, do some things in their offense. They share the ball really well. They're averaging about 16 assists a game. Their leading scorer is a forward. I think he's around 6'8", named Jason Carter. They have their point guard as their leading assist man, Tavion Kirk, and then they got a guy named Doug Taylor down low who's their leading rebounder, and he's got 15 blocked shots so far on the season. So he's got some defensive prowess down there when other teams try to get into the lane. So something the Muskies will need to be aware of when they take on the Bobcats on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I think they're a very formidable opponent coming in. In fact, I looked at the MAC preview, and they were picked number 3 in the MAC, which usually has some pretty decent teams. Usually only get one to the NCAA, but they play a lot of the Midwestern teams a lot of times up against the Big Ten in their non-conference. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a test for the Musketeers. Going to have to play a good game, and I think the big men are going to be challenged. And my concern is Tyreek and Zach Hankins may be getting in foul trouble. We can't have that because Tyreek is, he would almost be averaging a double-double. I think his rebounding right now, he's averaging 9.3 rebounds a game, but that is only because I believe there were a couple games where he was in major foul trouble and he didn't get very many minutes, and that kept the rebounds down in those games. Otherwise, he would be averaging a double-double. In fact, if you look at the Musketeers, their stats right now, if you were scouting them, it's kind of scary in the fact that they're really balanced. I mean, I'm looking at Najee's leading them with points at 13.1, Q right behind him 12.3, Scruggs at 11.8, Tyreek at 10.9, Hankins at 10.6, and Wellage with limited minutes is at 8.8, most of them coming from three-point range. So a very balanced team. So we got a lot of options. So that's got to be exciting that this is a team. But, again, sometimes they don't play together as a team. So we got to get that win on Wednesday night. Any final thoughts about the Bobcats coming to town? And one other thought is the 2 games they did lose were both lost in a tournament, and they were actually in Jamaica. So you take those 2 games out of there, they've got some pretty quality wins so far, and come in at 5-2 on Wednesday night. Anything else on the Bobcats from your end of the?
Well, I hope one of the 2 teams involved in the crosstown shootout is not victorious on Wednesday night, and that would be because the mighty Norse pull off the upset over at UC.
Actually, I think that game's tomorrow night. I think that one's on Tuesday, so you'll be able to watch that one. It should be on local television, I would think. All right.
Well, that will be a good one.
We moved to the crosstown shootout, a big game in the city between the UC Bearcats and the Xavier Musketeers. Of course, has had a very long history. Actually, first game played in 1928, March the 7th, 1928. The Musketeers defeated the Bearcats 29-25 at Schmidt Fieldhouse on the campus of Xavier University. What are your favorite moments from the shootout? And let me ask you this too: do you think the build-up to this game is as big as it used to be? I don't know if it's just me. I'm not in the workplace anymore, so maybe you can give me a perspective. Is there still a lot of talk about this game, bannering going back and forth? It seems to me that maybe after the 2011 game, the infamous brawl, that things have settled down a little bit. The build-up's not quite as big, but let me get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think the build-up is kind of mellow, especially I think that it being as early this year. Although I don't really remember last year having a huge build-up for the game because it was falling in in between conference games, and so it was just a couple of days of talking about it because they had quality opponent coming in before and a quality opponent right after that the Muskies had to be ready for, and same for UC. So I got to finish as that, and I think both fan bases right now are a little uncertain about what they have. I know UC's off to a fairly decent start. I believe they're 7-1. Yep, and but they're not exactly sure what they got, and so they're kind of still in that wait and see mode. Let's see what we got, and but as you all know, I work with a colleague of ours who was a huge UC fan, and I haven't heard anything yet. So, I don't think it's quite the same emotional level it was, and that may be a good thing. Just let it be a good quality game.
Well,
favorite moments?
Yeah, well, I was going to say the overall score, so to speak, or count is UC has won 50 times, Xavier 35, but since 1980, or what we call the modern era of Xavier basketball, when Bob Stapp came in, Xavier leads the series 23-16. But yeah, you've seen a number of these games through your life, and I'd say half of the last 22 years you've pretty much seen in person. What are some of your favorite moments from? And I'll give you mine.
I'm going to go with my two favorite moments. I have to go with the one I was in the Cincinnati Gardens in 1999 when the number one ranked UC Bearcats came in, and Kevin Fry went coast to coast for the layup and then iced the game with 2 free throws, and that was just led to a 66-64 win over the number one ranked team, and it was just an awesome upset victory for Xavier at that time, and just it was great being in that arena when that happened. And then my other one, I actually was enjoying from the couch watching the Musketeers at UC, and that was in '96 when Lenny Brown hit the pull-up just as time expired from the free throw line, extended there, top of the key, and just drilled the dagger right there at the end of the game and won the game for the Muskies. So those are two just that I always, especially the moments leading up to how Brown got the ball, because the UC player, I believe his last name was Williams, dribbled the ball off his foot out of bounds and set that up. So just an incredible turn of events there.
Those are two of my favorite memories, and in '96, the one at UC, I remember Andy Mack making the statement, UC Bearcats #1 in the country, #2 in their city, after the Musketeers beat them. Both those games, the Musketeers were ranked #1 in the country. And then, of course, another memorable game, I don't know if it would be a favorite memory, would be the December 10th, 2011 game, which we almost missed the big action because, if you recall, we were ready to walk out because Xavier had won the game handily, and they were just kind of dribbling it out before the infamous brawl broke out in 2011. And, of course, things changed as they moved it to the U.S. Bank Arena for a couple years, but glad it's back on campus. So what are we looking at Saturday, at the Bearcats. Who should we be concerned about? What's your take on the Bearcats? And do you have a prediction? I have a prediction.
Well, let's talk about what we got coming first. But yeah, like I think I said earlier, UC right now 7-1. Their lone loss being when they opened the year with Ohio State at home as they opened their new arena, and I think Ohio State handled them fairly well in that game. Then they've obviously won their last 7. They just had a win over UNLV this weekend, and they're getting it done as UC always has with defense. I think the KenPom, the defensive ranking, has them like 17th in the country defensively. They have one of the, some of the best defensive stats in the team defense categories. That's just what they've always hung their hat on. And they're running a matchup zone that they got from Coach Willard over at Seton Hall. Apparently he came in over the summer and met with Coach Cronin, and they talked a lot about matchup zone that he runs there. So maybe to a certain extent, Xavier has some familiarity with that defensive concept since they've seen it in the past, at least the guys who've been here and the coaches. So hopefully that helps them out there a little bit.
Yeah, and the concern there is Oakland in the second half. It kind of stymied the Musketeers' offense, played a zone, and at times the Musketeers didn't attack it very well, didn't score against it very well. So that is a concern. I didn't know that. And yeah, I know the Musketeers at times have struggled with that zone from Seton Hall. Hopefully they don't run it quite as well as Seton Hall did. And I think it's going to be a game where we're going to have to guard the three-point line. Jared Cumberland, although he only scored 3 points in their game against UNLV over the weekend, that win, and I guess after I read or I was listening to a talk show that I guess he got in foul trouble and was on the bench for a major portion of that game, reason why his numbers were down. But Kane Broome, and I remember Kane Broome last year scoring a lot in the first half because I'd never heard of this guy. I didn't know who he was, but I do remember him scoring. So I think the Bearcats, their outside game, the Musketeers are going to have to play, and something they've had a little trouble with so far this season is that three-point defense, playing that pack line defense. Sometimes they've left the three-point line wide open. So I think where we're going to have to probably try to take advantage of them is with their youth and their big men down low with Tyreek and Hankins and Najee trying to get some buckets close to the basket. That's kind of the way I see it. You got a prediction for me?
Well, I think it's going to be. It could end up being kind of an interesting line if the Muskies decide to play zone in return. Because I think UC really wants to try to get to the basket, and as long as they kind of lock in on Cumberland and Broome, they're not really a great three-point shooting team outside of those two guys. And it's not something that they're looking to do. It could be just an ugly Chuck go get rebounds, see who can get more offensive rebounds and put them in, kind of a thing. And it could be a fairly difficult game to score in, which if it is a difficult game to score in, I'm not sure who that favors. Because, the Muskies are really balanced, but you don't know who's the guy. Like, who's the guy who's going to get buckets for them when they need one in the closing, 2 or 3 minutes of a game. And I think UC knows who their guy is. They're going to give the ball to Cumberland, and they're going to let him go to work on somebody in that situation. So I don't know if that favors UC over Xavier if it's close. I think it's going to be a really tight ball game, really close, and it may be a challenge for both teams to get over 70. It might be in the 60s, and then I think the Bearcats might sneak it out by a point or two in that ballpark at being at home.
Well, I agree with everything you said, and another factor that we have to take into account is, again, it's going to be a little bit more electric than probably either team's played in so far. You know, the new Fifth Third Arena. And it seems like, I think, if you look back in the recent history of this game, it seems like the home team probably has won more, although I know Xavier has won a few games at UC in this recent what I call the modern era of Xavier basketball, but it seems like the home team has won. But we also, both sides, got a lot of new players. And with that atmosphere, sometimes you don't know how they're going to react to that. They might be a little too hyped up and, you know, not play the way we would expect them to play. And then sometimes, if you recall in this series, sometimes there's been kind of like an unsung hero, somebody stepped up that kind of like Kane Brune last year for the Bearcats. And I remember a few years back, I think they were playing one of the games down at US Bank Arena. Justin Martin, who was a decent player, but I remember he went off and scored like 20 points or something in one of those games and helped the Musketeers win that. So, and I agree with you. I think it's going to be ugly. Bearcats hang their hat on defense. Mick Cronin, a protege of Bob Huggins, he started that many years ago, that they talk about defense. They try to play tough defense. They pride themselves in defense, and that's how they try to win games. So I think it's going to be close, 1 or 2 point game, but I have it written down right here. Xavier 62, the Bearcats 60. That's when you said below 70, I totally agree with that. Any final thoughts or fleeting thoughts on the crosstown shootout? We can call it a shootout again. Had to call it a classic for a couple of years.
Well, I'm kind of hoping that something I heard, I believe it was said by Rick Broering today on another podcast I was listening to. This could be a game where someone like Kyle Caslen shows what he can do offensively, because he might be the forgotten piece, and that could help out the Muskies in that regard as well.
Yeah, and Kyle Caslen, of course, with the transfer from Columbia, has, again, got a lot of games under his belt and played in, I'm sure, a lot of major arenas out there on the East Coast when he played for Columbia. All right, any final thoughts about the we won't be there because we don't go to UC to see the Musketeers. We don't go on foreign territory. Any final thoughts on the shootout, or are you ready for some shootout trivia?
I'm ready for some trivia.
Well, again, the Bearcats opened their new arena this year, but I want to go back to the very first game played, March 7th, 1928. Interesting, that's actually my father's exact birthday. March 7th, 1928, the Bearcats were defeated by the Musketeers. But do you know why they invited the Musketeers invited the Bearcats to come play at Xavier on March 7th, 1928? There was another reason for that game.
Was it the opening of the Fieldhouse?
It was. It was the opening of Schmidt Fieldhouse. You picked up on my hint there that I talked about the Bearcats opening up their new Fifth Third Arena. So you are correct. You win the prize today. March 7th, 1928 was the first game in Schmidt Fieldhouse on Xavier's campus. Of course, a structure that still stands but is not used for home games anymore. I think the seating capacity is today. I know it's not even that, but I think at its peak it was about 4,500 spectators. Although I do have a book, I give it to you. It's the history of the Crosstown Shootout, written by a local journalist, Bill Cook, and very good. But he talks about that I think it was the Cincinnati Enquirer reported there were 9,000 or 10,000 people there, which they said was totally impossible because there's no way you get 9,000 or 10,000 people into Schmidt Fieldhouse. All right, well, we will be watching, and we'll be back next Monday. Again, hopefully all goes well with this, and we get this downloaded on the Grueling Truth Network. And so any final thoughts besides Go Muskies?
Let's go Muskies.
All right. See you next week.
All right.